I've definitely been interested in this one. When the trailer dropped for it, I think we all were a little intrigued by its premise. A man who appears in everyone's dreams for no reason and becomes a celebrity by accident, which spirals into chaos. A weird slice of absurdist dark comedy horror. Originally meant as Ari Aster's follow-up to Beau is Afraid, which by the way is great in my opinion, I just didn't have time to cover it this year. One screenwriter, Christopher Borgley, had his own success with directing Sick of Myself from last year. Ari instead petitioned Borgley to direct his own script, while he'd take up a more producer role. And oh, this does feel like Beau is Afraid, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Now, I don't know a lot about Borgley. I remember hearing about his blend of fiction and documentary drib, and hearing about Sick of Myself going around festival circuits. But it wasn't until this film that I finally got to see any of his work. Since then I have seen some of his incredible music videos and short films, but Dream Scenario was my first introduction. I caught this at IFFBoston Fall Focus, and it's hard to not argue that this film is definitely going to stick in people's memories. Like right off the bat, this is one of Nick Cage's best performances in his entire career. Like up there with Mandy, with Adaptation, with Leaving Las Vegas, with The Pig. It's just fantastic. It's not a very out there performance, but it's perfectly frustrated and naturalistic to a point I had to remind myself, wait, that's a bald cap and that's the same man who did Not the Beast! Not the Beast! Ah! Open my eyes! Eyes! Ah! Like, if all you know of Cage is just his wild side, first of all, watch some of the films I just mentioned, oh my god. But second, this is a good one to remind you just how versatile this man is when you give him a role to shine in. Michael Cera as well is fantastic in this. He plays this modern talent agent type who seems to be obsessed with pitching to advertisers as much as possible. And it adds on to the bizarre feeling in this film. Hell, the whole cast is great. Tim Meadows, Julianne Nicholson, Dylan Jedula, all are pretty great. But their greatness is all elevated by their seeming mission to torture and frustrate Nicolas Cage. And that's perfect for what is essentially a Kafkaesque absurdist comedy. Like A Serious Man or Synecdoche, New York, this man's life basically becomes Kafka's The Trial, and everyone kind of looks at him like, well, I mean, that's life, I guess. We better just move on. And the humor comes from us as the audience screaming, no it's not! The very concept of a man who cannot control what he does in people's dreams being held to account for them by the world is amusing in its pure train wreck nature. And it's accentuated by some excellent directing. Some of my favorite little details being that the film's real world is always shot a little off kilter, a little strange, unsettling. There's a lot of low angles, slight Dutch angles. And I always appreciate that at the beginning, the dreams are shot entirely differently, more cinematic in a way, but slowly become more and more naturalistic, emphasizing how they become realer to the people experiencing them. And every element of horror in this film is always accented by absurdity. Nick Cage doesn't just attack you in your dreams, he does weird motions while doing it, contrasting his real-life self. It becomes this odd soup of pure strange torture that feels like it should be mean-spirited, but because the film is always emphasizing that this is such a strange, impossible thing, it instead just becomes like a giant farce with one straight man taking the brunt of it all. It's entrancing and features probably the best meta-commentary on the concept of cancel culture I've ever seen, basically making fun of the idea of this happening and people applying it to that. Hell, it literally features the funniest drop of the name Jordan Peterson possible in a movie without being accompanied by a giant groan. It's great. But it's not perfect. The film has a few problems, most appearing towards the end of the second act, which ends with an event that's a bit much in my opinion, and then immediately jumps forward in time and switches styles in a manner that felt so jarring, I genuinely was confused what had just happened. It ends stupendously, but the entire final 15 to 20 minutes leading up to it is a bit odd feeling. And it feels like it loses which should be the core for that ending to truly come together. A focus on the real relationships he's losing. That is one of the few moments in the film where it just seems to lose itself in its concept. And unfortunately, while the other parts are really good, it does take up a solid bit of the finale that makes it hard to ignore. But the rest of it, it's something pretty fun to be sure. It's not perfect by any means, nor life-changing. It's certainly not going to top my favorite films of the year list, but it does certainly have a chance of being on there somewhere later in the list, because it's something uniquely fun and worth rewatching. And this feels like the beginning of even more from an excellent young director in Borgley. Hopefully we see more of him. And his dreams. Christopher Borgley's Dream Scenario gets an 8 out of 10.